kobolds. These vile creatures are about twice the size of gnomes, or half the size of a human, and combine the worst features of goblin, rat, and reptile with malevolent creativity. They are not a physical match for most of the giant species such as humans, unless they outnumber them 4 to 1, which they usually do. Dr. Unfriendly's Comprehensive Guide to Everything. Sir Reginald struggled to get back to his feet, rubbing his naked legs to remove the dirt from the many cuts. The darkness around him and in the huge pit was full of the vile little creatures, their eyes reflecting with the moonlight, reddened back at him. For the 100th time he wished he had his weapons and armor back, so he could teach these scrawny creatures a lesson. He had stopped wishing for his warhorse. He was certain they'd eaten it already. He shook his head with regret at that thought. His family had bred horses for 200 years, and this generation had been the finest ever. His warhorse the finest of the lot. Eaten, and likely raw. He growled to himself and looked his questioner in the eye once again. The kobold was dressed only in a loincloth and belt. The belt was hanging with a dozen various knives, and its hand held a lead-tipped whip. It spoke the king's Neslish with a horrible, bastardized accent, barely understandable. It was short for its kind, its snout about 4 handspans above the ground, and its sinewy, reptilian arms twitched in anticipation of using the whip again. "We has asked you many times, and yet you lies," it hissed, and began walking in a circle around him. Reginald briefly thought of reaching out and strangling the little monster, but he knew he'd have a dozen crossbow bolts through his hand before he ever touched it. Assuming they didn't stop him with a magic spell, his skin crawled. "We hears it that a Neslish knight never lies." "That is true," Reginald growled, aware he had not been technically asked to speak. The whip cracked across his hip, drawing blood, and he gritted his teeth but refused to cry out. Instead he stood up straighter, prouder, in defiance. "If you never lies, then tell us how many knights is in Redlock. How many arrow humans? How many sword humans? Tell us now." The creature stopped and turned to face Sir Reginald and regarded him coldly. "I will not lie, nor will I betray my oaths to the baronet and the king. I choose not to answer." The whip cracked again, and a bigger gash sliced across both thighs. Sir Reginald stumbled back to his hands and knees, and then began slowly standing up again. "Not tells the truth is the same as lies. You tells us now, last chance." Reginald drew himself up to his full height, stared blankly ahead, and remained silent. The whip cracked again across his belly, and he staggered briefly but stayed standing. There was a strange burning in his gut. He had a feeling the whip had cut something internal. The torturer brought the whip back for another strike, and suddenly its hand stopped in place. The torturer struggled with his transfixed hand for a moment, and then stopped and looked over his shoulder fearfully. "Now, now, Gendel," thrummed a deeper voice from the darkness. "He'll do us no good dead. Well, not as much good, anyway." There was a shuffling sound of kobold feet in the darkness, and a faint, scraping sound like horseshoes in the dirt. Sir Reginald groaned slightly, but did not move. A figure stepped from among the shadows in the pit into the same column of moonlight that lit Sir Reginald and the torturer. It looked somewhat like the other kobolds, but was larger, maybe chest-high, with blue-gray instead of slate-colored scales. It wore no clothes, except a long blue scarf thrown over one shoulder, and a crude jade amulet on a thong necklace. The creature carried a rope, which led back to a copper-colored warhorse. In spite of himself, Reginald breathed a sigh of relief. Cobble, his warhorse. He seemed in good health, although the whites of his eyes showed as he looked around at the verminous creatures surrounding him. The giant blue kobold glanced around the pit as if staring down all the others, lastly at the torturer, whose hand was suddenly released. The creatures all backed away a half a step. Then it looked up at Reginald calmly. "This is a fine horse," the creature began, speaking in a wildly different, sharper accent. "I appreciate a good horse, as I'm sure you do." "Killing my horse won't make me talk, you realize. I assumed he was already dead," replied the knight. The blood leaking out of the belly wound was blackish. Reginald had seen that before. He was pretty certain he'd be dead soon. "No, you misunderstand me. I'm not going to kill your horse. That would be a waste. In the meanwhile, I wanted to let you know something. I am skilled in necromancy. Once you are dead, my magic will get whatever answers I need from you, but I'd rather get them from you willingly. Tell me what I want to know, and I'll give you your horse back. Not your weapons and armor, of course. And set you free to warn your village. That's a fair exchange, is it not?" Reginald's mouth twisted. In a way it was fair. There was a possibility someone at the village could heal his wounds. With a warning, the village could prepare for a possible attack. The damage might be minimized. He thought of all the possibilities and dangers for a solid 2 minutes before answering. "Falsier has only one knight left alive, and perhaps 20 soldiers. Virtually everyone in the village is trained as militia, perhaps 100 more. The law says everyone has to own and practice weapons. This won't do you much good, though. Since I left, Falsier has been recruiting. He may have another 20 knights by now and double the soldiery." The giant kobold stared at Reginald in silence for a moment. "Now, Gendel, now you may kill him. Reginald, you are not worthy of your knighthood. I am disappointed." The creature turned to walk away, and Reginald lunged, hands reaching for the creature's throat. Before he reached the thick little neck, 3 miniature crossbow bolts speared through his wrist, perhaps 10 in other places, and he froze in place just like the torturer had. The blue creature looked over its shoulder briefly and bared its teeth. "Save the skull. I'll need it. Do what you like with the rest." Reginald kept his eyes focused on his horse being led away, looking over the heads of dozens of scrawny, tough little creatures as they advanced towards him with blades shining in the moonlight.